The MTA reported a total of $16.7 billion last year. Out of that total, only $6.3 billion came from fares. The question then is, if less than half the MTA's revenue comes from subway fare, where does the rest of the money comes from? That's what we'll answer in this episode. Let's get started. Before getting into the numbers, I would like to address the why. Why should we look at the true cost of the MTA? And the answer to this lies in honest pricing. A society without honest pricing is doomed to confusion and mismanagement. You won't know how much things cost you, and you will shift the blame to people who perhaps don't deserve it. Now that this is out the way, let's get into the video. The MTA publishes a budget report every year. Now, the numbers I'm going to show you in this video actually comes from this report, so I'm going to leave a link in the description if you want to fact check me. Now, we already covered that the MTA made a total of $16.7 billion last year, and out of that 16.7, 6.3 of it came from subway fares. Now, what we will do is we will look at the other items that are bringing the MTA revenues, because I think you're going to be quite surprised at how the MTA generate money. Let's start with the first item, toll. The MTA made about $2 billion in toll revenue last year. Now, when I first saw this number, I asked myself, what is the MTA collecting toll from? And after a bit of research, I discovered that the MTA owns several bridges throughout New York City. Bridges such as the Thrognegs Bridge, or the Verrazano Bridge, or the Triborough Bridge, or the Battery Tunnel are all owned by the MTA. Now, when people pay toll to cross those bridges, that revenue goes to the MTA. So next time you're paying that $20 toll at the Battery Tunnel, you could thank the MTA for that. The MTA made $705 million in what it classifies as other revenues. Now, this mainly consists of sources such as advertisement, access or ride, parking income, senior and student fares, etc. Pretty straightforward. The MTA makes about $1.2 billion in subsidies. Now, this subsidy is from the New York Department of Transportation, but also from the Connecticut Department of Transportation because of the MTA's operation in the Metro North. The city also subsidizes the MTA by covering the cost of their operation budget deficit. Now, the last revenue source for the MTA is dedicated taxes, which brought about $5.9 billion in 2019. Now, notice something, that the MTA is getting as much as dedicated taxes as they are in subway fares. This is a pretty big number, and for this reason, I would like to break it down into smaller pieces to show you where this dedicated taxes are coming from. Another thing that is worth noticing and why I want to cover the dedicated taxes is the fact that the MTA is a private company. It's a private entity, I should say. And a lot of people probably don't believe that because they believe the MTA is some sort of state or local agency. It is not. The MTA is actually a private corporation. It's a public benefit corporation, meaning that it's a corporation that must do a service that benefits the public good, but it is neither a state nor a local agency. Now, I know that there will be many people that doubt my statement that the MTA is a private entity, and for those people, I'm going to read you a quote made by the MTA to their bondholders some time ago, and here it is. The MTA is a corporate entity and apart from the state, without any power of taxation. Now, the MTA told their bondholders that so that, perhaps their bondholders wouldn't press them as much for money. They were basically saying, hey, we can't just raise taxes. We're not a state or a city entity. But it does show my point that the MTA is a private corporation. It's not a public authority. It's similar to like how the Federal Reserve is not federal, The MTA is not really a state or a city authority. Anyway, let's get into those numbers and see where those dedicated taxes are coming from. The way the MTA breaks down the dedicated taxes, it's kind of abstract. So you have to do some digging to find out what exactly these acronyms or these things mean. So after some research, here's the list of what's behind these taxes. The dedicated taxes can be broken down into several components. The first one is a sales tax. New York City has a sales tax of 8.875%. Out of that number, 0.375% goes to the MTA. Next in the line is a petroleum tax. If you buy gas or diesel for your bike or your car, the MTA charges you a tax for not being green. Next comes a petroleum business tax. This is a tax imposed on petroleum businesses operating in New York City or New York State in general. They basically get taxed for importing petroleum into the state of New York. Right after this come a vehicle registration tax. If you're buying a car, well, the MTA doesn't like that too much. There's a $50 fee, a $50 MTA car registration fee, and that money, of course, goes to the subway. There's a driver's license fee as well. If you want to own a license, well, apparently MTA doesn't like that neither. There's a $16 MTA driver license fee or MTA permit fee. So if you're basically getting a permit or a driver's license, MTA wants a cut. Next in the line is a mortgage recording tax. Now, I'm not sure how the MTA ended up at mortgages, but if you're buying a house, although this transaction seemingly has nothing to do with the MTA, there is a tax for that. There's an additional tax of 25 cents per $100 on a mortgage you secure that goes to the MTA. What this means is if you get $400,000 for a mortgage to get a house, you will owe the MTA $1,000 in taxes, guaranteed. Next in the line is a payroll mobility tax. Payroll mobility tax, huh? We're getting really creative. Moving up in the world, well, the MTA thinks you should pay more for that. If you make over $300,000 a year, you have to pay a minimum of 0.11% of your payroll as a tax to the MTA. Those of you who think you're immune from this MTA payroll tax should reconsider. When the income tax was originally, formed, it was only 7% for those who made $500,000 or more. And that was 1916. Think about that. The income tax, the original income tax, was only 7% for those who made $500,000 or more in 1916. Now we all pay the income tax and we all pay much more than 7%. Now I do want to say that this list is by no means exhaustive. There's so many ways that the MTA taxes you that it's really unclear to find out how exactly the MTA is bringing in all of its tax revenues. And considering that it's a private entity, you have to sort of give them credit in terms of like how much they persuade the city to tax the public to raise funding for the MTA. So I was really impressed by that. Now, I'm by no means anti-MTA. I do want to leave the judging up to the audience. I'm not going to say MTA is good or bad. I do want to say one thing, however, that the MTA often boasts how cheap their MetroCard is, when that's really half the truth. While their MetroCard is relatively cheap, there's a much bigger cost for the MTA that is hidden. That's it for this episode. Be sure to subscribe if you want more street information. And of course, don't forget to download the Cityscape app if you want to discover secret spots you did not even know existed. That's it for this episode, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye. An MTA aid? I mean, what's good? I want some aid too.